Welcome to the new episode of the Raven Lunatics. I'm Dwight and MacPherson. I'm a writer, editor, and publisher, and I'm joined this morning by my wife, Rebecca.
Rebecca MacPherson. I'm actually the VP, Admin, and Managing Editor for Hocus Pocus Comics.
And we're also joined by...
I'm Chris Sentner, the curator of the Edgar Allan Poe Museum. Welcome aboard, Rebecca. And we are honored to have today Karen Lee Street, who's a British American national. She was born in one of Poe's favorite cities, Philadelphia, where he wrote The Pin, the Pendulum, and The Murders in the Rue Morgue. And now she's been in London a long time, which is where Poe went to school when he was growing up. And she's already written, among her many works, screenplays and things, she's written 2 in a series of Poe novels. It's going to be a trilogy. She started out with Edgar Allan Poe and the London Monster from 2016. And then she did Edgar Allan Poe and the Jewel of Peru. So we've got to see a lot of this Poe Dupin mystery series, and now she's working on Edgar Allan Poe and the Empire of the Dead, which will be set in Paris in 1849. So welcome, Karen.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Welcome.
And I wanted to ask you how you came to Poe. How did Poe find you, and how did you find Poe?
Well, when I was 10, we were given an assignment to memorize lines of poetry. And the more lines of poetry you learned, the better your grade was. And the teacher gave us a list of recommended poems, one of which was The Raven. So I did my best to memorize it. I got most of the way through it. And that got me interested in Poe. I then went on to read his Tales of Terror, which worked on me. I really enjoyed them, but they gave me nightmares, and they were banned from the house thereafter. But it kept me reading Poe.
Well, how much of The Raven do you still remember?
Oh, not enough. Not enough.
Yeah.
That was a long time ago, but I should try again. Rethinking about the learning of it made me think I should really try to memorize it again.
Nice. Well, Rebecca has fully completed reading The London Monster, and I'd just like her to go ahead and...
Well, I wanted to talk about it, but obviously not too much, because I don't want to give any of it away. But I thought it was such an interesting concept to have Poe and Dupin working together, or even hanging out together.
Yeah.
That was a great idea. How did you come up with that concept for that?
It's strange. I don't remember coming to the idea of even using Poe in the story, because originally the idea came from the Jewel of Peru. I started researching a basic idea set in Hackney, near Stoke Newington, where I used to live. And as I researched it, I came across a book called Old Times by John Ashton, which told the tale of the London Monster. And it was fascinating. So true tale of, I'm kind of dipping into that already, but true tale of the London Monster, which he attacked over 50 women from 1788 to 1790 in London. And the story fascinated me, but it was told in quite a jocular manner. So because it became a kind of mass hysteria crime where the more women that were attacked, because they were attractive women and quite well-to-do, more women started claiming to have been attacked by the London Monster. So somehow, and I don't quite know how, I thought about Poe. And then I remembered a book, a Poe collection someone gave me years ago that had a brief biography of Poe in it. And it had mentioned that his grandparents were actors on the London stage. And I thought that must be about the right time. They must have been around when the London Monster was committing his crimes. And I dragged out the book, which is this book, Penguin edition, and thought it fits. So that started the tale. And then I thought, all right, this is a crime. You have to bring in Dupin. So then it came into the whole thing of if he inherited letters, if Poe inherited letters written by his grandparents suggesting they were the perpetrators of the crime, I felt he would react very emotionally. So Dupin was a much more rational voice to bring in for this investigation. So roundabouts.
I have not finished reading yet, but in my defense, I have a script that I'm working on that I need to produce in a timely manner. But what I've read so far, I mean, I love it. I love how you've captured that period. It's the language is wonderful.
Even down to the way you describe the costumes that they wear, the words that you use, which of course they would use back then. I love when authors take the time to get those words right. It just took me right back there. I loved it. Absolutely love that.
Thank you. That's tricky, and trying to capture Poe's voice, of course, is difficult. And an approximation of the voice. Obviously, you can't try to ape his voice completely, and who could do it? But just to get a taste of the voice, that was a challenge, and fun, but a challenge.
Well, did your background in screenwriting really help with that, creating that voice?
I hope so. I think it did. I felt it did. I reread all of his stories, and then I went and read his letters. I found all of his letters you can get online very interesting and very useful, and definitely screenwriting for dialogue. Yeah, I think so. I'd like to think so anyway.
And it helps that Poe wrote a lot of his stories in the first person.
Exactly, and that was the main reason for doing it, because his tales are in the first person. It just felt like it had to be that way, even though it made it perhaps more of a challenge. But also, you can play with the unreliable narrator concept, because he uses that a lot, and just the emotion of it, and where is this coming from? What do you trust within it? So you're right. That's it. Just felt like it had to be that way. For me, anyway.
When did you realize this was going to be a series?
The first version of it was quite long, and then someone suggested to me, well, there's more you could do with it. I thought, oh, all right, yeah, this is an interesting idea. So I was still writing book one, and then because I'd started with the concept for Jewel of Peru, I thought, all right, well, actually Poe could work with that, because that was set in Hackney, and because he lived in Stoke Newington as a child, it kind of fit. And I thought, well, where's the next place would be? Well, Paris, because Dupin's from Paris. So I just wanted it to be a trilogy, and then, this 1840, 1844, 1849, three slightly different flavors. So I hadn't finished book one, but it hadn't started out as a trilogy. Developed into that, and then I'd taken a very long first book and edited it down.
Were there any surprises that you found getting inside of Poe's head? Anything that you didn't know you'd discover in there?
Oh, I am a Poe fan and not a Poe scholar, so I had to do a lot of reading. And it was fascinating, but just what's in the biographies, the more you read, the more you realize there is to learn. And you can go on forever, and at a point you have to stop. So I read several biographies. I don't know what surprised me the most. I was trying to focus initially on learning something about his grandparents, but not that much is known, and even trying to research something in London. And I guess he didn't know that much, really, given his background and his childhood and how little the short amount of time he spent with his mother. So I suppose the relationship with his adopted parents, I didn't know much about that. And that made me feel even more sympathetic towards Poe as a person. Just, it seemed to me, I quote Hitchcock on this, because I know Hitchcock was a real Poe fan. He was very drawn to him because he felt he had quite a sad childhood, and that gave him a lot of empathy for him. And so that was something that I hope I brought into, it's a main theme within book one, within the London Monster. What motivates him to sort out, are these letters real or not? But that was a sort of surprise in reading more about him. And certainly what life might have been like for his grandparents as actors. I didn't know much about that time period and how actors would have lived in the late 18th century.
We have talked about that before, the way that Griswold's words linger.
Yeah.
So were you surprised to find things and say, wow, that really doesn't jive with what I've heard about?
Well, I reread, of course, the obituary he wrote several times. And yeah, I still can't quite get my head around someone that would be that, I don't even know if vindictive is the right word, that nasty about Poe. What had Poe really done to deserve that? So that was, well, I don't know that I believed his obituary because I didn't know that much about it. But the more I read about Poe, the more shocking it was that someone would do that to him. And again, it made me more sympathetic towards Poe. Yeah.
It's funny. I've asked Chris. They have a new painting of Griswold, and I asked if they were going to reproduce it into dartboards to sell at the Poe Museum. I still think that's a great idea.
That's very good.
Oh, the article we were reading about London's claim on Poe. Everybody wants to claim Poe for themselves, and he was a worldwide traveler, so they each have their own reasons for it. But you wanted to ask her about that particular article. And it was his time in London that he spent. They want him to be theirs.
Did you uncover anything particularly interesting about his childhood in England?
Not anything more than I read in biographies. I mean, there's a lovely sort of plaque to Poe in Stoke Newington, which is great. And I know people lobbied to get that installed for quite a time. And I think it's meant to be on the site where the school was, but it's now a kind of street, a cafe. So I took a few photos of that I still have to put up on the website. But I didn't find that much more in London. I tried to unearth any kind of information about his grandparents and went to kind of the birth and death records office. But because Elizabeth Arnold and her maiden name's Elizabeth Smith, pretty common name. So even though I found a marriage between the Arnolds in a place, I'm not 100% sure it was actually his grandparents. It is a common name. So, I went and I tried to find where he'd lived as a child, and I could see where the building would have been, but I'm not sure it's the actual building. These things were rebuilt. You should wander around and try to take photos. And just places he would have gone. And that was a question I had in writing book 2, because near where he lived in Stoke Newington, Hackney, which is kind of the basis of where one of the characters, Helena Lediges, is from, was the largest plant nursery in Europe at the time. And that echoed with Bartram Nursery in Philadelphia, if you know it. And I wondered if he'd gone there as a child, because it was a real tourist attraction. So, it's thinking, where might he have gone as a reasonably affluent family? It would seem to be a day trip they might have made. But again, I have no record of that. So it's just imagining what might have happened. It's really just down the road.
Well, it sounds like you've made a lot of discoveries just walking the streets that Poe did. And did you get to see any of the buildings that were still there after this time that he might have known?
Yeah, there's, again, I took some pictures in Stoke Newington. I went to the literary festival there when the first book came out 2 years ago, and I tried to find the places and photograph it. Again, I still have to get them up on the website. It's just time and finding the right photos. But, so many of the buildings go or disappear, but certainly he would have walked through some of the places I put in book 1, through Clissold Park, and just those streets were definitely there. A couple of the churches where they did a Gothic evening that I participated in, and he definitely would walk past that church. So it is fascinating to just wander around and see, retrace his footsteps in a way, and imagine what he would have thought. And part of it would have been a happy time, I think. Part.
I like the idea also of taxidermy throughout the book. That's one thing I'm fascinated with myself.
Oh,
So
I.
this is really cool. I don't want to give it too much away. I'm just going to say that.
Well, I mean, Dickens comes into it, and there is a connection there again with Barnaby Rudge, which is a book that Poe liked of Dickens's, and supposedly that might have inspired The Raven. I don't know more about this than me, but this is kind of how the tale goes. And then Grip, Dickens's pet raven, is stuffed because he adored the raven and lives in Philadelphia. So he lives in the Philadelphia Free Library. So I did, when I went to Philadelphia to see the Poe House there, I went to the library and saw Grip. Sadly, I missed the nice exhibition they had there in on the bicentennial, but he's there. You can see him, and I know there's special items in the library with the Gimbal collection, I think. But yes, that was a big Victorian thing, really. So Helena the Digges, the character who invites Poe over initially, or hires him in my book, her father was a big bird collector. So again, that's what inspired Jewel of Peru, just investigating the idea of bird collecting and wealthy people sending people out to Latin America to collect birds, which is sort of sad and horrible, but they made these incredible displays of birds. And George Digges, who owned this nursery in Hackney, which again, perhaps Poe went to see, had one of the biggest bird collections in London. And one of his collections is still in the British Museum. So I extrapolated and said, well, maybe she was a taxidermist. I don't think she was, but that's just bringing in the fiction into the factual. There was a Helena the Digges, but she wasn't a taxidermist to my knowledge. So.
Okay. Yeah, we know that Poe loved nature as well. I mean, right, Chris? I mean, Poe wrote extensively about nature, so I thought that was nice as well to bring that into the novel.
Yeah, I'm trying to put that into
I need to get reading. I hate to. I'm right in a good part, and I'm like, oh man, I want to keep going.
It's a page turner. It really is a page turner.
Is.
So I read it really fast because I was just like, wow, this is really incredible. I just love people's different twists on who you would be hanging out with. I thought that was really interesting. So.
Right.
And Dupin is you made him a real interesting character. Yeah. I haven't figured him out yet.
He changes. He was obviously, you can do your interpretation of Poe, and it has to be rooted in what you can read of him and read of his letters and read of biographies. Dupin, he's in 3 stories, and you get a certain sense of him, and it was fun giving him a backstory. I mean, there is a backstory in the short stories, but developing that further. And then just seeing how he changes, because he does change quite a bit in the 3 books. I won't say anything about the 3rd one because I'm just about finishing it, but he does evolve. And then it was fun to try to think how they would work together, particularly if Poe is feeling very emotional, because my thought was that given his background and his history, if he received letters saying his grandparents were criminals, I mean, how would anyone react? That's the basic premise of book 1. What would you do if you received a chest of letters that suggested that your grandparents were criminals, or your parents, whatever? And perhaps you had developed, created a positive story of them in your own imagination because you never got to know them. So that was the shock for me that he's dealing with in book 1. And then Dupin is being much more rational when Poe gets manipulated emotionally by his nemesis. And that was fun to do.
I love it. Love it. I don't want to talk any more about it, but
it's tricky because in reading crime, you're, or a mystery or a crime, the twists here and there, it's so hard to not give away something possibly important.
Right.
So where can readers buy your books?
Well, online, or hopefully most good bookstores. I know Amazon has it, but Barnes and Nobles, any of those, and hopefully more bookstores. Ask for it in a bookstore, and then hopefully they will get it in. That's always useful.
Do you do any book signing tours? You gonna see that coming up?
Not at this stage. I'm going to focus on that more when I get the next one done. I did a bit. It's funny being in Australia, so I'm going to look. It comes out in November, book 2, Chula Peru in November, and I've just been so wrapped up in finishing book 3, and then I'll have to edit that the next few months. And I haven't had time to do anything else, so that will be the next phase. And then with the 3 together, I mean, in a way, I think they can be read standalone, but yeah, I think so. And then it builds. 3 together should give you more information for each, and then they have to reflect back. So the third one is very strange, but
awesome.
I need to hurry up and get reading. I need to hurry up.
It has to be
hard.
right?
Yeah.
That's all I'll say.
I've been doing a lot of audio books on audible.com because I'm so busy doing work, but I still want to read books, and it's just like,
it's just finished.
Too many books, not enough time.
There you go.
When I was over in London in July, they were just recording Edgar Allan Poe and the London Monster, and it was really interesting to have. I got to sit in for a couple of hours and hear the main reader read it. They did get a woman into Karen Cass to read the Elizabeth letters, which I was very happy about because I felt we really needed to have a woman read her letters. Because I love Elizabeth. So that's there. So I have to sit and listen through it. I just received it yesterday, in fact.
It's awesome. Oh my goodness, I love it. It's so good to see it when someone's reading it. You really picture it in your mind. It comes alive. So I never thought I'd be a person to use audible.com. I love flipping the pages and stuff.
Right.
And when I end up being so busy, I thought, let me just listen to a book. And I just... somebody reading to me.
If you like doing 2 things at once, I just thought I have to start listening to audiobooks more with, cleaning or driving, or I go running, just to do it then and do something constructive. And you kind of run out of time to read when you're trying to write, as you know, and you're doing everything else you have to do. Yeah. So, they're great. But the interpretation.
Well, I think we forget sometimes that, we're like, I don't have time to sit down with a book. I have to listen to it. Oh, that's inferior. We started out telling stories orally. So there's nothing wrong with listening to an audible book. Okay. It does count, Absolutely.
I was just saying to friends, and every night my friend went and read stories to his daughter, and I thought that was marvelous. I'd forgotten about that, and she loves it, and just that whole reading of stories to somebody else is really lovely. So, and it was fascinating to hear someone else's interpretations, because when he was reading the book, who wrote that? It seemed new and different, and just how he would choose to read the phrase, or they'd occasionally ask me questions about which way would you prefer this read? Wow, they all kind of make sense, but I hadn't thought of the interpretation of how you could read the sentence. I mean, it only happened once or twice, but it was wonderful. They took the time to do that, but just I'd read it out loud in editing it, but I hadn't thought about that. So that was a new thing. Very, very, very interesting. I really admire actors that can do that. But you're not bouncing off of anyone, it's just reading in quite a different way, a different type of performance, I suppose.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, I think everybody should go check out KarenLeeStreet.com.
Yes.
And you can find out more about her. You can order her books right through Amazon or your local bookstores.
And if it's not there, ask for it. Ask them to order it.
They have the capacity to order books. It's amazing, right? If you don't see it on the shelf.
Yes, demand it.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks for coming here tonight.
Right.
Well, spend some time with us, or this morning, depending on where you are.
Yes, exactly.
She's always the next. She's probably the next day already. It's my Sunday there already.
Is it Sunday there?
So if it's midnight, then it is.
think so. That's a writer's answer, isn't it? Let me open the shades and see. Okay, it's daytime. It's nighttime.
Oh my goodness.
Well, thank you so much for talking with us,
you.
Karen. And
It's been a thrill. I'm so excited to meet you face to face,
Yes.
sort of, but yeah.
we would love to have you back after you
Yes.
finish the
thank
next
you.
book as
And
well.
yeah, fingers
Absolutely.
crossed. And I'd be curious to hear what you think of the two, how they build. It's always interesting to hear. Because I think it's a different read for someone that doesn't know a lot about Poe. It works. And then people that know a lot about Poe, it's a different, hopefully I've embedded things that are interesting enough within that. And, to me, it's a tribute in fiction. It's, hopefully I've honored him well enough, even though it's a fictional fantasy, if you like, alternative history.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for taking the
Thank
time
you.
to talk to
It's been
us.
a pleasure.
Special thanks to our guest tonight, Karen Lee Street. We really appreciate her, and her books are phenomenal, as Rebecca and I can attest to. So if you would like to find out more about Karen, visit KarenLeeStreet.com and pick up her books. And support other authors that love Poe, like we do. And if you like what we've done here, go ahead and like and subscribe below and join us. And we are going to be doing a contest for Halloween. We're going to be giving away some things to one of our subscribers. So go ahead and subscribe, subscribe, and you may be our lucky winner of some very cool Poe stuff. Right, Chris?
Absolutely. All sorts of good Poe goodies out there. And it's October. This is like the Christmas season for Poe people. So we've got events coming up everywhere. Next weekend, Baltimore, the International Poe Arts Festival. So you want to check that out the 5th and 6th of October up in Baltimore. And you can find out more information on the Poe Baltimore website. And then, of course, the Poe Museum's got things going on all month long.
Mm-hmm.
So thanks, everybody, for being here. Thanks to Karen Lee Street. Thanks for Rebecca for coming and classing the place up a little bit.
Oh, you're very welcome, sir.
And thanks to all of
Awesome.
you.
We may have to have her back again. Usually she's just in the shadows,
Over your shoulder,
lurking,
yeah, crawling across the floor.
But it's nice to have her on here. So thank you for watching once again, and we will see you very soon. Bye-bye.